Oh, well, that's very cool. Yeah, that's definitely like, yeah. Read after me.
You're not ready to start. We're just getting our remote participants online, make sure they're there.
Yeah.
We okay? Okay, great. Let's get going. So a very warm welcome to ICRW on a cold January day. We're really thrilled to see all of you come out here both in person. We have many, many more people joining on the phone as well. And we've been absolutely delighted by the response that we've gotten to this invitation to join us today. So my name is Catherine Fritz, and I lead ICRW's advisory practice called ICRW Advisors. And today we've got a wonderful session lined up for you. And this amazing response that we've gotten, I think, is not too surprising to us. We know that 2019 could be a very pivotal year for gender smart investing globally. And that's because never before have we seen so many resources directed to this catalyzing strategy to achieve gender equity. And I think never before have we seen so many collaborators, organizations coming together in unique collaborations to advance the work and ensure that these investments are made as smart as possible. I think that's what we're in the room to discuss today. So the purpose of this event is to share knowledge about gender smart investing from a variety of perspectives, and our panel represents the variety of perspectives we'll be hearing from you soon. As well as talk about where the field is going, as well as what types of tools and resources are available to inform and measure impact from gender smart investing. I know many of you probably were part or may have been part of the Gender Smart Investing Summit that was held in London back in November. If you weren't, you're welcome to the community, but it was a wonderful meeting. I think many people on the phone as well may have been there. It was a wonderful technical exchange, but also a movement building experience. I think we're all part of a movement that's advancing gender equity. So it's not just a technical conversation. Hopefully this type of convening also serves the purpose for us to network, learn more about each other, and hatch new collaborations as well. So we have a wonderful panel of colleagues who are lined up to make some presentations. Then we'll have a moderated discussion and also open it up to questions and comments from you here in the room and folks who are with us online today. And before we start, we're going to have a few opening remarks from Kristen Haffert, who's country director for UN Women's We Empower program. She's right here. She's going to come up and say a few words just to frame the discussion from a global perspective of UN Women. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to say a couple things to kick this off. I want to thank ICRW for giving us the opportunity to speak. We're very, very excited about this tool. Congratulations on launching it. We saw it come through at the end of last year, and we were able to go into this event to hear more about it and to really see kind of the technical aspects behind it. The project that I work on, as Catherine said, is called We Empower. And We Empower is a program for G7 countries. I'm running the US We Empower program, and it's focused on improving women's economic empowerment. And so our work is very much aligned with this tool because we're really trying to get the private sector and the public sector to take really meaningful steps towards creating gender equality. The sort of lens we're looking at this through is the future of work. So the US program, We Empower, is focused specifically on really trying to anticipate how the landscape is going to change of work. You know, you have the gig economy and a lot of different things coming down the pike. We want to make sure that women are part and parcel of that, and it's central to that, as well as innovation and really making sure that we're out in front and that technology and the future of work isn't happening without us. The We Empower program is sort of anchored by the Women's Empowerment Principles. And many of you might be familiar with them. They've been around since about 2010. And I'd say this is kind of a reboot to say we need companies to sign on to these empowerment principles, which basically give a framework of what the private sector can do to be more gender sensitive. And so it's a very broad framework. It looks at the workplace as well as the marketplace. And so this tool, we're also very focused on gender lens investing specifically, and women entrepreneurs. And so this tool is, we see this as an important step in, giving something very concrete, specific, sector specific, to investors so that they can, meet some of these overarching criteria that we've over the years developed to get the private sector. I brought these postcards. These are the Women's Empowerment Principles. They're out front. They were upside down, but anyway. So just a couple points on why we are excited about this. In our work, we're really trying to make sure that companies are making meaningful change. So, we know that how many women are on the board is important, how many women are in leadership, but we want to make sure that companies are actually making the workspace and the culture a place where women want to be. And we know that when companies do that, they're more financially successful. They are able to do all the things that sort of the Forbes 500 companies want. They increase their retention rates, they increase their recruitment of women, I was just finding some new statistics. I always kind of have the same ones. And I was just looking at, there was a study in California that said that 25 of the 400 firms with the highest percentage of women in their executive, in their board, 25 out of 400 firms with the highest percentage of women executive board members in 2015 had a median return on assets of at least 74%, higher than the whole group of the 400 companies. So, and there are many global statistics. I kind of always say the same one, so I went to this California study, but we know that companies are more effective when they have women in leadership. And so what are these meaningful changes that we're talking about? We're talking about, again, it's a culture change and making the environment a place where women want to stay. We see companies all the time hiring women, recruiting women into a company, and then the women leave. And people say it's because they're having families, having babies, and these women are leaving and they're going and starting up their own firms in many cases because they feel like the culture isn't there for them and that they're not supported. And so many of these meaningful steps fall under work-life balance. And when we say work-life balance, we're talking about pay equity, flexible schedules, paid leave, on-ramping programs to get women back after they're out and when they do start a family. And so these are the things that I think we see sort of ranked among the highest for women wanting to be in and stay in companies. I don't know if any of you know Patagonia as far back as 1983, they have on-site childcare, and they have a 99% return rate of mothers to work. So, and there are many examples like that. I have a couple booklets with me that I can share on examples of what different companies have done. But the bottom line is we know that companies are better, they're less risky, they're healthier companies when they're a place where you have gender diversity and more broadly diversity. And we see that, and we see it in statistics in terms of innovation and what these companies are able to drive, and it makes them more sustainable in the long run. So this isn't about the short game or this quarter or this year. This is about the long game, and I think that's what is one of the things we want investors to know. It's so we're really excited that you have this tool now to be really concrete and to be able to ask these hard questions and to say, okay, is this company really making meaningful change or is it just a numbers game? So I want to say congratulations to ICRW again, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion today. So thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Yeah, meaningful change, and companies will really want to be at work and want to stay. I think those are all high priorities and well said in terms of framing the situation. So what I'm going to do now is introduce everyone on the panel, and then I'll invite you each up to make your presentations. We'll start with Alec Paxton, who is an investment officer at OPIC. I know there's some students in the room. We're going to start some alphabet soup. I'll try to explain as we go along what each piece of the alphabet mean. But don't be shy at all about coming up to any one of us later and asking what it means. We're happy to have you. I know this is a learning experience, so please let us know. So OPIC stands for the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. It's the U.S. Development Finance Institute. Those are called DFIs. And Alec helps lead the 2X initiative. So he chairs the 2X Challenge, which is a working group that oversees the commitment by the G7 DFIs to mobilize $3 billion to support women in the developing world through investment. And today, Alec will be sharing more about the 2X initiative and how OPIC is working with other DFIs to integrate gender lens in investment. Christine Roddy is here from the Alpha Mundi Foundation. And the foundation is a really interesting entity established in 2016, I believe. And it's the nonprofit sister organization to the Alpha Mundi Group. And the Alpha Mundi Group provides debt and equity financing for social ventures in the human development sector. So we're talking about microfinance, affordable education, fair trade and agriculture, and renewable energy. And the foundation provides technical assistance and measurement support to those social enterprises that are receiving investment. So Christine's going to tell us more about how impact investing works with the fund and how the foundation actually integrates gender equity into the investment theses. Genevieve Smith is here from ICRW Advisors, and Genevieve is a specialist in gender and markets with a focus on women's inclusion and value chains and women's economic empowerment more broadly. Genevieve actually led the team that created the Gender Smart Investing Resource Hub that we launched in December, and now we're disseminating this event this Thursday to let you know more about it. We will also have a webinar tomorrow at 11 a.m., which is a deeper dive into an orientation to the Resource Hub. Genevieve is going to talk about tools and resources and what role they play in helping investors to identify and cultivate companies that are working towards gender equity in their business models. And Tia Subramanian is joining us from the Criterion Institute. And the Criterion Institute almost needs no introduction, but I'll say a few words anyway, for those of you who are not familiar. Criterion is an activist think tank that works with social change makers to demystify finance and shift financial systems in general. You'll tell us more. And Tia developed an interest in using finance as a tool for social change through working for 6 years at Arabella Advisors, which is a philanthropic advisory firm, and she helped found the firm's impact investing practice. And Tia is going to share about Criterion's work in advancing gender smart investing space, and specifically how you're catalyzing funding and investment to address issues of gender-based violence. So we'll start with Alex. Over to you. The alphabet soup. That's
wonderful. You want to come here?
Please come on up.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. My name is Alec. Again, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. Excited for the opportunity to talk today to learn more about the hub that's put together by ICRW. And I thought that I would kick us off with just a few thoughts. I wanted to introduce OPIC for those that aren't familiar with what we do, and then talk about 2X, which is our work around gender smart investing. So do I have the control? All right, we go to slide, Steve. Thank you. So for those that aren't familiar with OPIC, we're the U.S. government's development finance institution, which is where all the acronyms come from the government, which means that we make investments in private sector companies that are operating in emerging markets whose work has positive development impacts in the communities and where they're working. OPIC has 3 products that we use. We use debt, we use political risk insurance, and we also use support for private equity companies. We have a portfolio of about $24 billion spread across 90 countries and about a little over 600 actual investments. And we're sector agnostic and we're regional agnostic, meaning we'll work in most sectors and we'll work in most parts of the world. Our center is not too far from here. Our headquarters and really most of our staff are about 8 blocks away. We have about 275 to 300 people that work on this on a regular basis. That's kind of an introduction to OPIC, but really what I want to talk about is 2X. So 2X is OPIC's commitment to direct its capital and to help mobilize private capital to invest in women, specifically to invest in women-owned and women-led businesses, and invest in businesses that are providing products and services that have a disproportionate impact and benefit women. 2X, we also think of as kind of OPIC's commitment to applying a gender lens to every single investment that we make. So we have 2X transactions, and these are transactions that are with companies that are owned by women, companies that have strong participation of women on boards, with companies that have products and services that serve women or have a disproportionate impact on women. But we also have a lot of other transactions that we use. Development finance institution, we work across sectors. We invest for a lot of different reasons. But what we're doing at OPIC, and what we've been doing since March 2018, is learning and teaching ourselves how to apply a gender lens to every single one of those investments that we make. As I mentioned, we launched it in March 2018, so about 9 months ago. When we did that, we made a commitment to mobilize $1 billion to invest in 2X transactions. That was, I guess, 9 short months ago, and I feel like there's a little bit of work that went into before we got there, but over those 9 months, we've been pretty successful. If I can jump to the next slide. We've already invested, it's 1.4 billion up here, but it's actually 1.5 billion if you look at the portfolio today, which means we either drastically undershot in what our expectations were, or we've been pretty successful. And I think it's a little bit of both. I think the journey that we went through with an organization that just invested generally and had an interest in impact investing and an interest in gender, being an organization that really feels like we understand gender and how to do gender lens investing and gender smart investing well, is an interesting conversation. I don't want to pretend like we know what we're doing. We're still feeling it out. We've got a good critical mass. I feel like we're starting to move and feel comfortable in the space. But it's what I want to talk to. I think it's what I'm excited to talk about today in the discussions that we're able to have. One thing that was mentioned that they would like me to talk about, and I think it's really kind of important, is what did we do to get from 9 months ago not being an organization that thought too much about gender to moving to one that does. And I think of it as just the process of organizational change. We had some great tone from the top. So when the new administration came in, one of the big focuses for them were gender, and we brought in some leaders from the front office that were really, really focused on this. And what that allowed us to do is go to the market and say, look, we are really that. Like, are you a women-owned business? Or are you a business that has strong participation of women in your team, your leadership team, on your boards? Do you have products or services that are helping women? We want to talk to you. And that allowed us to kind of develop, I think, a pipeline of companies that were willing to work with us to tap into those networks. We also did a lot of work to build internal buy-in and to build training. I think one of the things that OPIC found is that a lot of our investment officers who own this gender work were having a hard time engaging in it because they didn't understand what it was. They felt very uncomfortable engaging in conversations that they didn't have a toehold in, that they didn't even know how to start. And so we spent a lot of time with the Criterion Institute and others, bringing in some of the leaders in that space to teach our investment officers how they can do that. And I think the last thing that really been critical to our success is, to be successful, critical to what we've been able to accomplish so far, I can say that confidently, is kind of a network and of outside support that we've had from folks like ICRW, folks like Criterion, the thought leaders in the organizations that really think about this, that have trod this path before us, and will help like move us along and to take those next steps. So that was what I wanted, kind of just the introduction to OPIC into 2X. And I think I'll stop there and I'll kind of save some time for the rest of the discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Christine Roddy and I'm here representing the Alpha Foundation. I'd like to echo thanks to ICRW and the team for hosting this event. I'm excited to be here. So I'll provide a brief overview of the Alpha Money Foundation. So the Alpha Money Foundation is the sister organization to the Alpha Money Group. The group is an impact investment advisory firm, They provide predominantly debt financing to social enterprises both in Latin America and East Africa. The foundation was started as a sister organization in 2016. We have three major pillars. One is around delivering pre and post investment technical assistance, supporting the impact measurement efforts of the fund, and also, participating in field building events like this one here. And I think that, gender integration really cuts across those three pillars very nicely. So why do we adopt a gender lens at the Alpha Mundi Foundation? I would say we do so for a few major reasons. One is that we recognize that the impact metrics that we were collecting and tracking weren't necessarily telling the full story. The second is that we recognize that supporting women and girls is an essential component of our mission that's around poverty reduction. The third is that we truly believe that balanced teams make better teams, and they make better teams that yield financial outperformance. And finally, we acknowledge in our role as capital providers, we have a unique role to help encourage, our companies that we invest in and work with to incorporate gender. So I want to talk a little bit about our sort of journey around gender lens investing. In 2017, we made a few commitments. We committed to incorporate gender considerations in the pipeline screening and due diligence process. We also made a commitment to discuss the gender lens application and agree on metrics to track with our portfolio and pipeline companies. And finally, we made a commitment to mobilize resources available from the Alpha Mundi Foundation that would enable companies to use these gender insights and try to capitalize on any opportunities related to gender. So what has our progress been to date? We have, thanks to the ICRW team who helped co-develop with Acumen the gender integration diagnostic tool, we've started to use that tool as a component in our due diligence process. So we request that all pipeline companies complete that tool. And the completion of that tool, I would say, is really just a starting off point. It provides us with something to point to and discuss with our companies where there are strengths right now and how they think about gender across their business model, but where there are also opportunities for improvement. Second, as I discussed, we continue to have these enhanced conversations with companies around gender insights and gender opportunities throughout the investment lifecycle. Third, we've standardized the impact sort of metrics that we collect on a quarterly basis. And finally, you'll see a photo in the slide of one of our beneficiaries from one of our portfolio companies. At the end of 2018, we finalized the scope of what we're calling our first gender workshop. Let me know if you have a better term for this. And this is, we're working with a company that works with biodigesters, which are disgusting things that take bio waste and convert them to clean energy and fertilizer. And basically, we're working with one of our portfolio companies to look at some of their business challenges and look at solutions that apply a gender lens. So we're really excited about kicking off this opportunity as long as the US government opens sometime later. So go to the next slide. In terms of the meat and potatoes of this presentation, what are some of the lessons that we've learned since we made these commitments in 2017? I would say first, when you look at the gender lens investing landscape, a lot of organizations think about gender lens investing as investing in either companies that sell products or services aimed at women and girls, or investing in companies that are owned or led by women. And we think that's a good approach, but it can also be limiting. There are missed opportunities with this approach. And so it's our hypothesis that if you work with nascent and young companies, like the companies that Alpha Mundi works with, these growing and early stage companies in emerging markets, and you work with them to try to help them understand how gender is so important and how to think about solutions to business problems when looking at a gender lens. We believe that our hypothesis is that this is the most effective way to achieve scale and impact from a gender lens investing perspective. Our goal here is to help these companies think about gender as a core business principle in the same way that you would think about environmental sustainability or social impact as a core business principle. A second big observation is that there's not a lot of data out there to support the gender lens investing thesis, unfortunately. Either we find that data is outdated, or there aren't apples to apples comparisons, whether it's across companies, it's across sectors, or across geographies. And at Alpha Mundi, we want to be part of the solution to this. We want to help build the business case around gender lens investing. A third lesson that we've learned is just basically that grant subsidy is required when it comes to working with these early stage companies and trying to help them think about gender opportunities. You know, these organizations and companies have competing priorities, they have resource constraints, and a lot of them are really excited about opportunities related to gender, but we found that subsidy and grant capital is required in order to help conduct these workshops, conduct trainings, etc. And finally, I would say that we've seen a proliferation of tools and resources available, such as the ICRW Resource Hub, which is really exciting, but it also presents a challenge. I would say that, you know, we have a running list of, I think, between 8 and 10 different tools that are out there on the marketplace related to gender wealth investing. And we have constant conversations internally about which is the best tool for us. You know, how do we strike the right balance of collecting rich data that'll help inform decision making, but also not, you know, require our companies to fill out forms that are too big of a lift, or we already ask a lot of them when it comes to impact measurement, impact collection, etc. So very briefly, in terms of next steps, we want to continue to integrate gender in our due diligence process. In addition to the first projects that we're launching in 2018, we have an additional 2 to 3 gender workshops planned for the year, which we're really excited about. And a secondary goal of these workshops is to help try to contribute to this, building this business case. We're hoping that through these workshops will help glean research and insights that help prove that, you know, incorporating gender into your business model can help yield stronger financial returns, reduce risk, and also yield sustainable growth. So finally, very briefly, how can all of this shape our portfolio? We have a few ideas that I'm presenting here, but I know that I'm probably at or beyond time. So we can discuss these in more detail as the conversation continues. So thank you very much. Oh, did you do that? Oh, okay, I did that. Great, that does work. Okay, hi everyone, good afternoon. I'm Genevieve Smith. I'm with the advisory practice at ICRW, as Catherine mentioned. I'm going to talk today about our Gender Smart Investing Resource Hub, which is the suite of tools and resources that we recently launched, snuck it in right before Christmas. So really excited to share a bit about that today. Just to ground the conversation a little bit more. Oh, maybe it's a delay. Anyway, to ground the conversation a little bit more, and for those of you, maybe just to backtrack moment as well. So gender smart investing is the use of capital to simultaneously generate financial returns alongside returns that advance gender equality. So it's really about applying a gender lens and integrating gender analysis into financial analysis to see things that you might have otherwise missed. And ultimately, integrating gender analysis and integrating this gender lens is just smart investing. So, hence the term gender smart investing, which is one that we particularly like because it implies and shows how it's, it enhances investment processes. So importantly is that with variation by sector and context, gender affects business and business affects gender, both inside and outside the company. And so this has led to the development of our Gender Smart Investing Resource Hub, which is a sector-specific suite of tools and resources. We kind of hatched this idea last year, noticing the huge proliferation of assets under management that are going towards integrating a gender lens. And the conversation has really switched from whether to integrate a gender lens to how to actually integrate a gender lens. And we've also seen with this, a proliferation of different types of tools. And this tool in particular is geared towards impact investors, both finance first impact investors and impact first impact investors. So that means if you're a finance first impact investor, that means that you returns, primarily you want returns. We also want social impact. Social first impact investors primarily want social returns, but at least to get their money back from their investments. So that's kind of who it's geared towards, and especially geared towards emerging and developing country markets, so impact investors in that area. The purpose of the hub is to help investors better integrate gender into investment processes, to enhance financial returns, gender equality and women's empowerment. So kind of a big, audacious goal. And where the primary use cases that the hub serves are to, one, screen potential investments, enable investors to screen potential investments through a gender lens, or conduct due diligence through a gender lens. And the second primary use case is to inform gender-related technical assistance that an investor might want to use with a current investee. So we have built out 4 different sectors thus far. 2 of those sectors are fully built out, and 2 are partially built out. So agriculture and off-grid energy are the 2 that are fully built out. The hub was developed with funding from DFID in their impact program, and also with support of the CDC group, which is the OPIC of the UK, the DFI of the UK. So they've been a huge help in, with the hub, and have also been alongside OPIC, really catalyzing this space in the DFI perspective, alongside other DFIs as well, which is really exciting to see. So we developed this hub, conducting interviews with various experts in the gender-led investing space, as well as impact investors, DFIs, et cetera, and also held 2 prototyping sessions over the past couple months. I already mentioned the target audience, but companies can also use the hub, and they can use kind of these different resources that we have. So the first resource that's on the hub is a gender briefing. This is it's about 500 words, very brief, that folks can read about or pass to their fund managers, that explains why gender matters in that sector, and why also what are the financial implications of considering gender within that particular sector. The second piece is a Gender Opportunities Explorer. This is an interactive portion of the website that you can kind of click through to see what are some actions companies can take, and specific actions companies can take to integrate a gender lens throughout the value chain. Again, very sector specific. And then there's the gender scoring tool and scorecard, which is perhaps the most exciting part of, or one of the most exciting parts of the hub, rather. And this is about about 35 questions, depending on the sector, that you go through, and it generates a personalized gender scorecard, detailed gender scorecard for that company. And then there's some additional components. We have case studies, again, for each sector around some of the leading companies in that sector that are integrating some of these gender opportunities, and what are the business benefits and social impacts that resulted from integrating a gender lens. And one thing I'm really excited about are the gender materiality maps that we have produced. So materiality is related to kind of what is financially material or important for a company. And we have outlined where in the value chain across these different sectors, gender is more material or less material. So basically, we're not saying that every company should integrate a gender lens at every stage of the value chain and have really robust, integrate all of these actions at every stage. Rather, it's really about understanding where is gender more material within that particular sector, and what are some actions you might want to consider that, again, will have both financial implications and gender equity implications. And then lastly, we have social impact visuals that depict the causal linkages between impacting gender in a value chain segment and what are the types of social impacts you can expect. So I'll very briefly go through just kind of a visual of the hub. And again, tomorrow we'll be doing a live demo at 11 a.m. And that will be a focused conversation on the hub. So hopefully all your questions are answered now, but you can join that too. So here's the briefing. The Gender Opportunities Explorer, you can click on, and you can see that it's broken down by the board, senior management and employees, entrepreneurs and contractors for off-grid energy, consumers and community members. So you can click on one of those segments, and it will pop up these different kind of a checklist of gender opportunities that one could implement in that particular area. And on the left-hand column, you'll see it's broken down by kind of what are overall policies and practices to have in place, but then also by value chain segment. So what are practices, policies that you would have in design and R&D, production and manufacturing, marketing and sales, distribution and installation, et cetera. That varies based on the sector. So an example of one of these is establishing corporate level commitment to gender equity and clearly communicating this to managers and staff. I want to flag that on the side, there's also a key. So we have identified the different opportunities. It has a green check mark if it's an opportunity that's relatively easy to implement and less resource intensive. So those could be some of the quicker wins. And then there's kind of the flame illustrates what, it's very exciting, illustrates the high impact potential for the particular business. It might be more resource intensive. Then you have the gender scoring tool. So this has 4 different sections to it. Kind of some basic background questions on the company are optional, questions related to representation in the company of women, and then internal policies and practices, and then questions specific to the value chain of that particular sector. So investor may kind of come to this page. They can download the scoring tool FAQs to share with their fund manager to understand how to use the scoring tool. You can also download the Excel form, which they could then give to their fund manager, who may also want to give that to the company to fill out. Kind of an easy to use Excel that you can fill out prior to coming here and filling it out online. And then there's the methodology section there too. So this is the first page of the scoring tool. You'll see that the score is broken down by board, employees and senior management, suppliers and distributors, consumers, and community members. So there's a score, kind of back-end calculations that inform all of these scores. You can explore more of that in the methodology paper. That top overall score gives kind of the high-level bucket score. So you see that 60% on the top right. And then there's a score broken down by value chain segment. Again, this is sector specific. And then the other 2 pieces of the tool include gender equity in the workplace. So you see the scores broken down by those different categories, such as representation, leadership, recruitment, hiring, pay equity, sexual harassment, etc. And then lastly is access, whether the product or whether the service or product has the potential to impact gender equity. So this isn't just check the box if you have a product that could impact women's lives, like cleaner burning cook stoves or educational resources. That's part of it, but then if you have a product and service that impact women's life, do you include women in the design process? How? Do you make that product available to women through access to finance, to thinking about their access to finance, to thinking about marketing messages, distribution, etc. So there's questions in the scoring tool that kind of populate that sort of response. So we're really trying to get at more of a nuanced understanding, instead of kind of a check the box, does the company do this, more of an understanding on how does this company actually have the potential to impact gender equity and women's empowerment. And that's kind of the point behind the questions and the scoring tool or scorecard here. I want to flag that we also thought a lot about intersectionality. Obviously, coming from ICRW, this is really important to us. Through our prototyping sessions, we asked investors, do you want, and intersectionality, just to back up, is the concept that people of different identities experience multiple forms and overlapping forms of discrimination. So people that spanning kind of gender, ethnicity, race, socioeconomic status, etc. So we have an optional intersectionality tool that is, if you download the Excel, there's a tab as well for intersectionality. So you can fill out, it's a shorter survey, you can fill that out and you can get intersectionality score for intersectionality in the workplace and the value chain. So we realize that investors aren't quite there yet in terms of integrating that into the gender scorecard, but we think the field is going more towards that, and so want to make that available for investors and companies that are interested in it. So excited about that component too. And I want to just flag a little something about gender-based violence. Gender-based violence is a core theme throughout the tool. So in the Opportunities Explorer, there are specific actions, by sector and the value chain in the workplace that can be taken to mitigate and combat gender-based violence. The scoring tool also has questions around that. And as I said, there's a score actually for addressing gender-based violence and sexual harassment. But that score is really around, do they have the right policies and practices in place to mitigate sexual harassment? So it kind of speaks to potential risk that a company could have related to that. But we want to flag that the workplace sexual harassment, in supply chains, et cetera, it's a symptom of deeper power dynamics. So it's not just, do you have kind of the right policies and practices in place to mitigate this and to kind of, if something were to happen, to kind of control the impact. But it's really about creating a culture that values equity, that values diversity, and requires change at institutional, cultural, and individual mindset level. So wanted to flag that as well. I think that's something important to us coming from ICRW too. And we have a kind of a separate piece of framework around combating that particular issue, and Tia will talk more about that topic too. So quickly too, and I know I'm spending a little bit more time. I had a little longer than the other presenters because we wanted to dive into this a bit more, is the materiality map components. So we drew a lot of inspiration from the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board called SASB, which has materiality maps broken out by different industries. And so we created materiality maps. Again, this highlights where gender is kind of financially important, essentially, for companies across the value chain. And so that's something to think about when you get your scorecard results. Where are scores low, but where is materiality high? So if you're providing if you're an investor and you're looking at providing technical assistance to a company, those are the areas that you might want to prioritize. So that's one way to interpret the results in the scorecard. We haven't yet averaged scores by sector. We haven't had, obviously, not enough data has been entered to kind of aggregate and average those. But it's our full intention to take anonymized data and provide benchmarking reports, et cetera, really once that we have sufficient amounts of data to better inform the space. And then also a primary use of the tool is to allow investors to compare companies within their current portfolio. So you can compare them kind of against each other and help prioritize gender opportunity areas and actions, as I mentioned, through looking at materiality where scores are lower. So that's kind of a bit about interpreting results. Happy to answer questions about that. Here's just a quick visual of one of the materiality maps for off-grid energy. Obviously, there's a lot of text here, so I won't go into it, but you can see essentially there's a heat map. So where the color is darker is where gender is deemed to be more material. You can explore some of our methodology on using this. There is still limited data on some things. So this was also by our own data in-house, the case studies that we conducted, other reviews, other literature that's available, data that's available. So you can read more about that if you're interested. And then just as quickly, not going to go deep into this, but these are what the social impact visuals look like too. On the far left are kind of the gender smart strategies, where in what area might they fall, and what are some of the short, medium, and long-term outcomes you can expect by integrating gender considerations into those different areas. Again, sector specific. And then this is just a visual of the case studies. So happy to share more about that. I think kind of ultimately, we at ICRW really see this hub and this space as something that we feel we can really contribute to and help move forward. And our mission being to empower women and girls and recognizing the immense opportunities and impacts that gender smart investing has to, that is incredibly exciting. So it's great for us to be in this space, and we hope that the tools and resources and data that we have can really inform investors and ultimately help inform and influence financial systems in ways that promote gender equity. So that's kind of the short of it. We'll be collating data, as I mentioned, cleaning up benchmark reports, hoping to build out the hub for other sectors, and supporting companies through technical assistance as desired and needed, and then helping track data and continuing to update the materiality maps and other resources on the hub. So, whew, there it goes. Yeah, thank you. I'm looking forward to questions. Sorry.
Great. Perfect. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, ICRW, for having us. My name is Tia, and I'm the Gender-Based Violence Program Director at Criterion Institute. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what Criterion does and how our work on gender-based violence grew out of our long-term work on gender lens / gender smart investing. So as Catherine said earlier, we're a nonprofit think tank. We think of ourselves as an activist think tank because we have a point of view and we advocate for it. So our central mission is to expand the number of people who see themselves as able to use finance as a tool for social change, regardless of what that social change is. So we are actually, we're pretty issue agnostic. Our orientation to looking at finance and social change is really one of looking at power, where there are power imbalances, who can we empower to make social change, and we look at sort of power in the world and also power in financial systems. So that is really what our work are. We've been working on gender lens investing for 12, 15 years. And that's really where that work grew out of, was to see the kind of massive gender imbalances of power in finance. And then our sort of third goal, so the second goal is to demonstrate how you can use finance to kind of change power relations. And our third goal, which is relatively new, about a year and a half old, is to mobilize institutions and individuals to use finance to address gender-based violence. And I'll talk a little bit about how that came about. But so gender lens investing, and maybe I should put gender smart investing there. So that I put this definition up there. I know probably a lot of people on this call know what it is, but I thought it was important to just go back quickly to the fact that gender lens investing is about incorporating a gender analysis into a financial analysis to get to better decisions. Because the way that gender lens, gender smart investing is practiced takes many, many different forms. And that's partly because what constitutes a gender analysis is different to everyone and has been changing a lot over time. And as you heard 3 different people speak about so many different ways that you can approach gender and investing in just gender related to companies and products and processes. So the kind of some of the trends that have been the trends since gender smart investing started, the growth of the market, I know that's been alluded to, it's been absolutely enormous. From 2017 to 2018, there was I think 85% rise in the number of assets invested with a gender lens into public market strategies alone. So just the number is huge. As I think Genevieve said, it's no longer should we, it's how do we do this. And governments are increasingly getting maybe it's not, it's governments, it's pension funds, it's all sorts of different organizations. And the practice has evolved really significantly in terms of the kind of breadth and nuance of how we go about doing a gender analysis. And everyone here spoke to many different ways. When it first started, I think there was more of an approach to, what constitutes a gender lens analysis is let's invest in a company with a woman on the board. But one woman on a board doesn't solve gender, which we all know. But so I think if you can encapsulate the evolution of the practice in one way, it's that the way that our sort of cultural understanding of how gender operates in the world is informing how we do gender analyses in finance, and that's a really good thing. So our gender-based violence campaign actually arose out of that work. When we were doing a workshop in Fiji, and we do these sort of 2-day workshops where we talk to people and sort of give them a training on the logic of finance and help them come up with ideas of how they can use finance to affect social change in whatever area they wanted. So we were doing this workshop with a group of women's rights organization leaders in Fiji, and we thought, people often focus on things like savings or how do you, what are the problems facing your communities, and gender-based violence just kept coming up. It's really, really prevalent in the Pacific. And they were all, just very invested in coming up with ways to use finance to address this issue. And so we started talking to more people, we started talking to more gender-based violence experts, to asset holders, and we realized that gender-based violence is a way that gender operates in the world, in a way that has an enormous amount of impact on people, and we should be looking at how that intersects with finance. And when we look at the numbers, people often say, what do gender-based violence and finance have to do with each other? But you look at the numbers, the prevalence of gender-based violence, it's 1 in 3 women in the world experiences some form of physical and sexual violence, and that doesn't account for the many men and gender and sexual minorities who experience violence, and gender and sexual minorities experience violence at extremely high rates. That obviously has enormous health, physical, emotional consequences on individuals, and then on families and on communities. And that is material to finance, whether or not we are taking that into account. So, there's more and more, we know that we have some research on how violence impacts kind of companies and sectors and economies. So the estimated cost of violence against women is, I think, 1.5 trillion annually. Some research just came out recently. Did people do that research? I can't remember, but the cost of workplace harassment alone, the annual cost to a Fortune 500 company is $6 million annually. So, I mean, there's more and more data coming out on this, but it's not something that's really factored into financial analyses. So our campaign, and then there are many, I'm going to try and keep it short, I won't go through all of these, but there are many sort of other trends that are making it the right time to focus on gender-based violence in finance. One is just the way that gender smart investing is deepening, and people are asking for different, more diversified portfolios, more products, looking at different issues within gender as a broadly. And another is the trends in wealth, in asset holding that we all know, where women and millennials are controlling more wealth. They want to invest with a socially responsible, aware lens. And as things like Me Too and Time's Up have increased awareness of the prevalence of gender-based violence, that's wealth holders putting pressure on their asset managers, saying, hey, are you screening gender-based violence out of? I hope my money's not, touching any companies where gender-based violence is happening. And so wealth managers are looking to differentiate their products because they have this kind of changing client base that they need to meet. So our campaign, one of the issues is that one of the issues with, there's a lot of interest, but there aren't a ton of products out there right now so a lot of people are eager to invest and say, oh yes, I definitely want my assets going towards gender-based violence, but there aren't that many products there. And so one of the parts so Criterion has this sort of 3-tiered campaign where the first part of our campaign is really because we need these products to be developed, we need people to signal that they want these products. So we're aggregating intent. We're having asset holders sign a letter of intent saying, I want to be able to invest in strategies that address gender-based violence. So and if anybody, by the way, wants to sign this letter, please talk to me afterwards. But as if we can signal that there's that much asset holder desire for this, we are then, can work with asset managers, with investors to develop these products, and products are already being developed. And really importantly to us is also engaging gender-based violence organizations and experts in the development of these products, because we, as I was saying earlier, our cultural understanding of how gender operates needs to inform the financial analysis, and this can't be done right, and it can't be done without, unintended consequences unless we're engaging with people who really understand how this works in the world. And that's one of Criterion's roles, is sort of trying to bring together all of these actors. So so that's the overview of the gender-based violence campaign, and very happy to answer more questions. And thank you.
Thank you all for those comments. That was really fascinating. And we have a few minutes, about 10 minutes, for me to enjoy my role as moderator on my mind, which is an incredible opportunity. And then we're going to open it up for questions and comments from those of you here and on the phone. So Tia, I'd like to start with you actually. And I think partly it's because, Criterion, if Criterion were a person, it would be like one of the matriarchs of this field. And you've seen the whole narrative take place over time. And I'm just curious about what you feel has brought us to the place that we are today, where we're finally, I feel like, achieved some kind of tipping point in terms of people's interest in the investments being made. Kind of what brought us to that point? How do we keep it going? And kind of what are you most excited about moving forward?
Yeah, I think a lot of things brought us to that point, and just the sheer the sheer volume of assets that are being invested with the gender lens is a big part of it, because, you know, as you can't invest 2.4 billion into 3 products, right? People are looking for, they're looking for diversified portfolios addressing things like, not just women in leadership, but products that help women, gender-based violence, you know, healthcare that affects women. So there's been, I think there's been a lot of desire for, different ways to impact gender via investments. And I think that people, we often call this change that's happening, that going from counting to valuing. So going from, you know, counting, oh, 3 women in leadership, this is a gender investment, to understanding how gender patterns operate in the world, and then figuring out how to value those, because that's what finance is, right? The system of assigning value to things. And that manifests in so many different ways. And I think that one of them is intersectionality. As you know, as people increasingly understand, as people who work on gender increasingly realize that gender does not operate in a silo. It really never has. You're not going to get to, if the purpose of finance is to get to a better decision, you're not going to get to the best decision if you're not looking at how these different systems interact with each other. And I think people are increasingly understanding that on the social sector side, and that is impacting how we all think and talk about these issues. So, and I think that will only continue. I think the work that everyone here is doing is moving it in those directions, and yeah, that's great.
Maybe moving over to Alec now. So thinking of OPIC, maybe obviously a big institutional investor, and also in the history of gender smart investing, more of a newcomer to the transformation to that mindset. And so I'm just very curious about what your perspective is on, you know, what are best practices for big institutional investors to shift this huge shift
Yeah,
to this transformative direction?
It's a great question. So turning the ship is the hard part, right? I think the business case for investing in women is there. I think that once you're able to turn that ship and get people to care, the case kind of makes itself. But I think one of the hardest things that we've had to do is train a bunch of investment officers that need to be very, very, very good at a whole bunch of different things, and give them resources that they can use quickly and meaningfully, and is at the right level of detail, I think is the hardest thing that we've been able to find, that's kind of we see missing from the field right now. And so I'm really excited when this toolkit came out. I think hats off that ICRW putting this together. I didn't realize CDC was involved. That's so exciting. They're kind of our thought leaders on this stuff. Is getting into the hands of investment officers these materials. I think that the case is being made, and that we will help make the case. I think the DFIs, the role of DFIs is to help create a market for this, but also to help lead on this and to help create that case. And I think that you have buy-in, at least from folks at OPIC. When we say we want to do gender lens investing, most of our investment offices said, we don't know what that is, but it sounds interesting. And so then we need to go out and explain what that meant, what we wanted to do in very concrete terms. And so I think that if there's anything that is useful and that there's a gap or a way that we can be helped, that's the way to do it. And that's one of the best practices that I've found. I talked about some of the others earlier, but just the ability to make sure that you have buy-in at the top and in the bottom of your organization, right? It's making sure that you're getting your leadership to buy into this, that you're making that case, you're spending the time to make sure that they're going out and they're talking publicly about the work that your organization is doing in gender, or applying a gender lens and doing gender smart investing, because that allows your investment officers to go to your clients and ask them that question, because they're not terribly comfortable answering either. This is often new for the companies that we're investing with as well. So I think those are some of the things at a time. I can go on forever. I think there's a couple of the big ones in the low-hanging fruit that I would want to communicate.
Maybe you could just give us some insight too on the G7 commitment was launched. When was it? It was back in.
It was June 2018.
June, right.
Yeah. So.
How's the response? How's it been?
It's been great. A bit of background. In June, on the margins of the G7, we launched the 2X Challenge. That is a commitment by some of the biggest DFIs in the world to mobilize $3 billion to invest in women. That is the G7 DFIs, so DFIs from the G7 countries. We have been going great guns, I think, in being really successful in putting together and harmonizing our definition of what we think it means to invest in women. And that's allowed us to go to the market and say, these are the kind of companies that we're looking to invest in. And if you're not here, if you don't meet one of these criteria, if you were willing to make some investments in your own company to get yourself into one of these places, if we can nudge you into one of these categories, we also want to work with you. So I think it's been really powerful. We speak with a much louder voice when it comes to the G7. We've been, the working group that I'm chairing that's putting this all together has been great. I mean, my job is really just as facilitator. I don't do a whole lot more as chair other than just get a whole bunch of really smart people in the room and let them go. And it's been great. And I think that OPIC is excited that we have others along the journey with us now. It's like a lot of these DFIs were there before we started thinking about this. I've been thinking about this for a while. So it's been going well.
Christine, I have so many questions for you. Just because, we're among the kind of resource and tool builders and metrics people as well. And so I would really love to hear more from you about is what's going well with the tools you've been using? Where do you see gaps? What do you like about the resources that are out there now? And what do you see as missing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one thing that's an opportunity and a challenge for us as a fund is that we're sector agnostic. So that means we work with companies that work in ag, that work in off-grid energy, that work in microfinance. And so, finding a tool that works across sectors, which really goes to the ICRW Acumen integration tool has been tremendously helpful. I think I made the point previously around resource constraints for these companies. So I've seen some tools that have been developed that are incredibly thorough, very well thought out, but even the user's manual is like 35 pages long. And it's tough for me to get through that. And when we're working with these companies and our investment team, frankly, that are already resource constrained, they have competing priorities, asking them to fill out a questionnaire that's 100 questions long or something that's not realistic. And so I think a challenge or an opportunity around the tools is just how user friendly are they? Is it easy to adapt to, like a Google form, for example? I really liked on the ICRW Acumen diagnostic tool that, I love that on your resource hub, the new tools that you're generating, I think it does all the calculations and everything through on the back end, but even on the integration tool that we're using now, there's it tells you how to score the tool, right? And how to develop a heat map and identify where there are opportunities for improvement and where there are strengths. So the user friendliness aspect is critical. I think, Alec alluded to this and, sort of this, I hate the word sensitization, but sort of this normalization or talking through with companies about why this is important, takes a long time and a lot of work. So to the extent that there are resources available, I know you said there's like a 500-word blurb on, why gender smart investing is important. So I think, we spend a ton of time on trying to develop resources and having talking points around, clearly articulating with our companies about why this is important, is tremendously useful as well.
Thank you. And just because you mentioned the Acumen tool, I just want to acknowledge too, Ali Galinsky's here, and she, that was the brainchild of Ali.
Thank you, Ali.
Thanks for using it. And anyways, was the predecessor of the work we've done since then. So thanks. I'm really glad to hear that you're using it. So what? Maybe over to Genevieve. So what's, as you were leading the team and acknowledging Ali, Shelley Martin, who's over here, who's also on the team, Margie Goals and Ted, they're in the room as well. When you all were, crafting this tool, can you just explain a little bit about the process that you went through to make it appropriate fit for use for different users and how that happened? Feel like it still needs to grow and expand to kind of be able to achieve some of the goals that Christine talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one challenge generally is that, as kind of gender experts, and there's a lot of nuance, there's things we want to add here, and it's kind of hard sometimes to kind of pull back and say, but we're developing a tool for investors who are already strapped in terms of their time, who are adding another layer onto their due diligence process or whatever it is. So how can we create something that is really digestible and fairly straightforward, that's not going to take forever to understand and implement? So we constantly were asking ourselves, do we need this question? How can we make this more simple? kind of what is the balance of like losing that detail, but making it something that's more accessible to use. So I think that was something that we were always asking ourselves through the process. It was really helpful to do the different prototyping sessions with investors and with gender lens investing experts. We had a lot of conflicting messages, from not necessarily from gender lens investors versus gender experts. It was like on both sides. Make it more simple, make it less simple, or it's fine. It was interesting actually. But I think one challenge that we wanted to make sure was really clear is that we wanted to kind of strip a lot of the subjectiveness that can come with questions. Like as gender experts, if a question is somewhat subjective, then you can kind of ease your way through it. But if someone doesn't know anything about gender, then a subjective question can result in misinformation. So we both try to kind of reduce the subjectiveness, but make it digestible and still valuable. So, I think that was our challenge. And I'll be keen to get feedback from users to let us know how we accomplish that or not. But yeah, over time, we do hope that this is kind of a lie, as we want to add other sectors, want to continue to improve it. And we really took a lot of, there's a huge amount of value that was drawn from other types of resources and tools that are on the market. Steve's gender scorecards, women's empowerment principles. There are various tools that are kind of geared towards maybe public markets or private as well. And so we really have our niche focusing on impact investors in developing country and emerging markets, and really focusing on like private equity and debt, and focusing on DFI. So yeah, hopefully that explains a bit about our history. Yeah.
Thank you all. I'd like to open it up now for questions from the room, and we'll also find out if there are any questions on the phone. Okay, let's start over here. 1, 2, 3.
Hi, thanks so much for this. So my question is how much you want to kind of differentiate yourself as a sector from the ESG sector, from an impact investment sector more largely. You mentioned a lot about like products on the market and there's not room for scale, and how do you actually channel, I'm thinking public market capital into this. And so, the impact investment in ESG, and it was like path-breaking, right? That Larry Fink wrote his letter a year ago saying that every company should kind of champion these principles, and how much you want to keep gender smart investing as separate for that, or potentially incorporate a gender lens into what the ESG sector is doing closer to at scale right now, I guess.
Thanks for that question. Yeah. It's been on our minds for sure. Can you share who you are?
Oh, sure. My name's Adrienne Bellani. I work at Internews, an NGO, but I have a background in impact investing and data.
Okay, great. And can you just explain what ESG is for anyone?
Oh, sorry. So it's essentially like evaluating a company based on environmental, social, and governance practices. So like Unilever is kind of the company that you think of as kind of the leader in that, but so it's not like a negative screening tool, but it's looking at how like a company is positively affecting those 3 things. And it would make sense to me just that like gender would be something else, because to your point, Ariana Huffington on the board of Uber didn't change the culture, right? So how do we kind of look at this?
So integration of gender with ESG, who'd like to pick that up?
Sorry, a little bit to it. So I don't think there's any reason that gender smart investing needs to be a completely separate thing. I think there are parts of it that very much should be integrated into ESG, and actually just today, Criterion and the GIN just released a whole new set of tools to that help investors basically apply a gender lens to, it's sort of linked to the IRIS metrics, but they're not exactly IRIS metrics. They're kind of more way for investors to align their portfolios to the kind of principles to incorporate a gender analysis into both certain sectors, and to look at kind of inequity in terms of leadership and pay and workplace conditions and different ways in which it shows up. That said, like you said, it's a screening tool, right? ESG, and so I think that I think gender smart investing also goes beyond that to be something proactive that we are trying to achieve. It's a way of achieving change. So I don't think of them as mutually exclusive. But yeah, curious what.
I think I would say, and I think this might be just a feature of working at OPIC in the way that we think about ESG, but I think of ESG as risk mitigation and preventing downside scenarios, right? So you're going to prevent harm to the environment, you're going to harm the communities that are affected by the projects or the investments that you're making. And I think the opportunities you have for investing in women, part of what you talk about with gender investing is preventing some of those harms, but I think a lot of it is the opportunities that you have to create value in investing in applying a gender smart framework to the investments that you're making. And I think that if we lump it in with ESG, we might get stuck with just looking at preventing the downside risk and not looking at the potential that you have in investing in women. And I think that's the story in the narrative that OPIC has been going for. And so I had this conversation recently last night about whether or not it makes sense to link these two things together. And I think there's some benefits to it. It has some traction and some tailwinds, but I think it's also, we might be missing part of the picture.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Caroline Rubin with Nathan Associates. My question is just more about, like, what is the role for companies like mine or, also NGOs in development or in like women's economic empowerment, gender space? Like, what is the role that we can play and what would a partnership in this space look like?
So I used to work at ACDI Boca, which works in a similar space, right? So these capacity development providers, I think an observation I have is that oftentimes these organizations work with really, really early stage organizations that aren't necessarily investment ready. They're looking for grant capital. And I think to the extent you can try to embed gender considerations with these organizations, predominantly in emerging markets, at a very, very early stage and truly help to embed in gender considerations as a part of the DNA of these companies that you're working with. I think that's an opportunity for collaboration and taking some of what we discussed here and applying it to your day-to-day at Nathan.
Okay, this one right next to this.
Hi, Megan O'Donnell with One Campaign. I wanted to go back to the point you made earlier and now just re-raised around the need for grant capital. And wondering if from your vantage point you see that as necessary because of their size and stage of development as early stage firms, or whether there's still sort of a perceived hesitation around, dipping toes into the water, and sometimes grant capital can be used as an incentive. And broadly to the group, how do we sort of approach things where you have this fine line, good balance between grant capital where necessary, right? Can perceive a world where, especially when we're talking about violence against women, you don't necessarily want everything out there to be profitable or profit oriented, but also making that case, for businesses to be invest because there is that financial return. So how do we see them as complementary?
I have a thought on that. Yeah, I think that there's definitely space for grant capital. So just kind of thinking about, we actually talked about this a lot on our team as we were developing the resources and the hub. Kind of thinking about the materiality maps too. Some of the areas that are kind of less material shouldn't necessarily mean that. I mean, maybe there needs to be more intervention. That's kind of more areas for grant capital, we would say too. Places where maybe there are some opportunities, but there's not like a clear kind of financial link that companies might have at the same time. And I think too, so coming previously, I worked with the UN Foundation, Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves, and worked with their Women's Empowerment Fund, as well as with Rachel in the back there. And it's interesting because the Women's Empowerment Fund provided grant capital to companies that were interested in kind of employing a gender lens in the clean cooking space. And a lot of the case studies on our off-grid energy part of the website, which illustrate kind of both financial returns and social impact returns, but illustrate that there is a business case for kind of the gender opportunities that they implemented, but it hadn't been done before. And so there was no kind of, you kind of needed that grant capital to create that data to illustrate that the types of returns that can happen by integrating these different types of gender opportunities. And I think that the Alliance has done a really good job of kind of providing that grant capital and showing how critical these different types of gender opportunities are to companies in the cooking sector and the types of impacts those can have. So I think that there, still is, and then also, we still do need more data that clearly links kind of always going to need more data around kind of gender diversity and materiality, especially in different segments of the value chain. And sometimes we need grant capital too. And then to, have the indicators built into those grant capital mechanisms so we can actually track and continue to collect that data.
And I think just to build off of what you said really briefly, I think the question of subsidy obviously really depends on the profile and size of the company, right? We're at Opportunity, we're working with, early growth stage companies and emerging economies that have limited resources and competing priorities. I think if Unilever decided to, incorporate gender considerations across their business model, would people provide grant capital? No. So I think the answer really depends on the who and the where that you're talking about. So for the context of Opportunity, it makes sense for us.
Can I also add one thing? Jenny and I listened to a really interesting panel at SOCAP with Katie Kaufman from OPIC on it, and they were talking about this question of like when to use blended capital and when equity and debt capital, and the speakers were really strong about saying, don't think because it's a gender investment, that means you have to go at grant capital, because that causes people to think gender is a risk, gender is an unknown, and you need, grant funding, but rather like Alec was saying, it's a potential like positive business impact. And we have some data that shows that. So it shouldn't, in some cases, of course, like you guys were saying, but it shouldn't be an automatic. We want to get people thinking that gender is a business asset that is a good investment, not just like a thing to do to be nice,
Okay, great. I don't want to neglect people on the phone either. And Joe is saying that there is one question on the phone.
Yeah, I think you maybe touched on this some. It's from Mercy. What seems to be the most effective strategy for making companies aware of gender-based investing? In particular, what size scale companies, example, Fortune 500 companies, multinationals, or smaller companies, do you see open to these models of valuation?
Scale of company.
I think companies, companies of all different, sizes can integrate gender lens, and again, it kind of varies by sector as well. There's also a lot of tools for public markets explicitly that are focused on gender, like Equileap, for example. And I think, gender lens in investing and using kind of gender smart analysis should and can be used, for all different types of companies. And we as investors managing our own money can use gender lens in how we invest in the stock market, how we invest in mutual funds, whatever it might be. So there's kind of like different layers, to gender lens investing. So I don't know if I totally answered the question, but I guess there's different types of tools and it's still relevant among different sizes and types.
I left hands up. I know I want to get here and then to you.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Edwin. I'm Robin Russell from the United Nations Foundation, and you probably got some whole question, Kennedy, or you can first, but I know we didn't get too much into the weeds about, we're using the word gender lens investing, and we're saying we really want to go beyond sort of having a woman on the board. What does that mean? We're talking about really getting down into the value chain and looking at gender-based violence. I wanted to just maybe get some takes on healthcare, because it's something that oftentimes doesn't get talked about, but something we're really pushing. And particularly when we talk about materiality and we talk about women workers, whether they're in the headquarters or in supply chains, where you guys see how companies treat their women and whether or not they provide healthcare, because we know, right, this is directly linked to their ability to be empowered. So whether it's access to family planning, whether it's access to prenatal care, whether it's access to menstrual hygiene management, all of these things, particularly in developing country contexts, but of course, in developed country contexts as well, are so critical. So I'm just curious how you guys see the health piece fitting into some of the criteria as companies are really looking. And apologies that I haven't had a chance to look at the resource hub, so maybe it's already in there.
Yeah, there are, in the Opportunities Explorer, there are opportunities related to health and safety for women, especially, since we built it kind of sector specific too, it will vary in the value chain, but in the workplace, there's absolutely health and safety considerations and practices and policies that should be implemented. In the scoring tool as well, there's some questions related to health and safety, but absolutely agree. I mean, women's health and women's safety is critical if you're going to create an enabling environment that promotes equity and that has diversity in the workplace, allows women to rise in the ranks. You have to have, the mechanisms in place to support health and support safety. So definitely really appreciate the work that you do.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the dimensions that we evaluate as part of the due diligence process is around, the equitable systems and structures and access to healthcare. Is maternity leave provided? Are there safe spaces where women can change before they enter the production facility? This is absolutely critically important and has impacts, from a financial perspective, from a retention perspective. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Just really briefly, I think that this is the advantage of kind of doing a gender analysis and deepening a gender analysis, because I think that doing that can also allow you to see the places the things that are undervalued, and I think there are a lot of opportunities in women's health that are undervalued and kind of great investment opportunities, and just to kind of shift the thinking to that from an investor's point of view and help spur change.
Great. Okay, yeah, so hi, I'm Lisa. I'm with Alpha Mundi Group on the investment side. So I'm just going to back up for a second on your question. So just on the blended capital aspect, so there's obviously been an explosion of impact funds in the last decade. And as Christine talked about, we're very uniquely positioned to work with these companies at an early stage. But I think in emerging markets with SMEs, it's still very much a push. So they're not coming to us, right? But we have the ability to push, but no fund can support that off the balance sheet of the fund. So, until we start building enough evidence that companies start recognizing it and asking for it in the way that companies are now self-selecting to get Gears rated or to get B Corp certified, I think that's where we still really need the grant capital there. And then I had a question for Alec too. I just wanted you to dive a little deeper because you said 1.4 billion, but you used the words catalyzed and mobilized. Yeah. So, how much is OPIC directly investing into different products? Like, what is your measurement of that, versus are you investing into funds that are then catalyzing and more? And then also it might be a little bit early, but, I don't know, I'm very, very excited about Project Build and the expanding resources that you guys will, have come next year, and hopeful that that's going to include some amplification of this, with your toolkit and whatnot.
Yeah.
So anything you can say to either of those?
I knew someone was going to ask me about this. Okay. Not Bill. The other part. So 1.5 billion is what we've mobilized. That includes OPIC's capital, and I believe it's around 750 million, and then another 750 million of private capital. That's not the exact number, and I can get that to you. Honestly, we're put that out. We talk about that. We have an app that spells out each single investment that we've made, if you want to look and dig through it.
But are these
these are
new types of investments that you wouldn't have otherwise made, or things that you're doing that you're now saying, no, these actually have a gender lens? Like, could you just talk a little bit more about the types of?
Yeah, that's great. So we have criteria that we use. So companies that are primarily 51% or more owned by women, companies that have 30% or more of women on boards, women based on the sector, a certain representation of women in senior leadership, which is materially used kind of some benchmarking across emerging markets to try to set benchmarks that make sense for us and where we're going to count that as a 2x project. And it's kind of across our three products. It's in debt, right? So we're mobilizing some equity, we're mobilizing additional debt, and we're coming in some private equity funds, so we're counting other LP commitments in those situations. But it's also with our political risk insurance. So we see that as catalytic as well. So people are making investments because of the comfort they're getting with the OPIC cover on those investments. Does that answer the question?
Kind of.
Let's talk about Build though, because that's really exciting.
It makes sense. So you're counting the mobilization. And then, I mean, with equity and current authority.
Yeah, we're really excited about what we're going to do. So the Build Act passed recently, October. It is going to transform OPIC. We're going to get a new name. We're going to transform the amount of investment that we can do, the cap on the amount of investment, but we're also going to get equity authority. Right now, we just come into debt and insurance primarily. We're going to do equity investments, mezzanine debt investments. We're going to get a whole lot of new tools that we haven't had in our tool belt before, and we're really excited for what we're able to do. Right now, we don't look at early stage companies because we need to come, we need to be able to come into invest companies that are willing to take on a couple $1 million in debt, and those aren't early stage companies. We do it indirectly through some of our private equity or companies, but not directly. And this equity is going to be game changing, I think, for us. Equity also gets you a lot more say in how the company operates, right? We're able to actually influence and have board seats and start making decisions that are happening in the companies that we're investing in, instead of coming in as a senior lender, which is a fine position to have, but nobody really wants your senior lender to be telling you how you should be looking, how you should be addressing things like, you know, the benefits that you're providing to your employees. When you're an equity investor, you get that say. So we're looking forward to it. That change should go live. We're expecting to go live October 1 of this year. We're running full bore on setting up the tools and thinking through the policies, the procedures, and the changes that we need to make internally in OPIC in order to affect those changes. So more coming in, we're excited. No, please, sorry, I know we're over time.
No, it's okay. We're just coming to the end, so we have time for one more question. I'm gonna go right here. Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Heather Kipnis with IFC. And I have a couple of comments, but just to build on what you were saying, Alec, Calvert actually has a really great tool that shows a level of influence per type of capital. And so I encourage folks to look at that because we've been using that within IFC. But this is a really great tool that you've put together. I think, Genevieve, you've talked to some of my colleagues at IFC, and we at IFC, we're an LP, so we're the International Finance Corporation, one of the largest DFI investing in emerging markets. And we've actually been going, we've been doing this for a while, but we just created a new guide for investment officers on what are the steps that you take to look at gender in your investments. And I was really struck by the tool where you guys have these gender material, it's always a hard word, materiality maps. And so we have some similar thinking on that, but it's great to see that because I want to share that with our team. So just a heads up that we'll be sharing that internally. But one comment on the data. So the big challenge that we've been having with the data is that there's a lot of anecdotal data out there in terms of per deal and per project, and there's quite a bit that we have on gender-based violence. We've been able to assess what the costs are to a company in terms of staff time and indirect costs in terms of healthcare. But what's been challenging is how do you get a global picture to be able to influence the decisions? And you mentioned gender diversity and materiality. So we are actually about to publish a report in March where we're looking at gender diversity with fund managers and gender diversity with women entrepreneurs. And we actually, I can't tell you about it launched in March, but what's the relationship with the performance of funds? And we do see an impact on the performance of funds. So hopefully that will be some data, because what we've been seeing with our fund managers that we've been working with is all of this is great, but unless we've got data to show them to take the first step, they don't do anything. So which leads me into my question for you. How are you measuring, and this is more for the tool, how are you going to measure how this tool will trigger capital flowing into investments on gender?
Sure. So currently we don't have any in place a way to measure how the tool will help trigger investments. I mean, we kind of rely on what partners and what users tell us. We are able to track the anonymized data on the back end, so we can see how many folks are using the tool, kind of aggregate findings and create benchmarks around what the average gender scores are for companies in agriculture in Kenya, who operate in Kenya, who are of X size and X number of employees. We can start to put out kind of benchmarking reports for investors that are kind of more specific. But in terms of how much it influences the capital and the different types of assets that are employed, we aren't tracking that. But again, for anyone who's using the tool or going to be using the tool, we love the communication. We love to know the feedback and how people are using it. So.
Unfortunately, we have to draw the conversation to a close, but we want to thank you all for joining us today, especially our panelists. And this room and the reception area is open for another half hour or so please feel free to mingle and network. We do want to point out, again, the webinar is tomorrow. And we also want to point out another resource. If you'd like to build your own capacity to become a more powerful player in this space, there's a wonderful opportunity coming up on March 12th and 13th, and it's a two-day Gender Smart Investing mini course led by the master herself, Suzanne Beagle, in collaboration with Kathy Clark of Duke University. So the link is here if you're interested in that. Go to it and find out more. Thank you.